The bitter winter wind sliced through the Montana territory like a knife, howling across the open plain as Archer James urged his exhausted horse through knee-deep snow. 3 days out from Lusk, Wyoming, with nothing but frozen emptiness stretching before him, he'd begun to question the wisdom of taking this shortcut back to his ranch. Archer pulled his sheepskin collar tighter around his neck, squinting against the relentless snowfall. At 32, he'd survived enough Dakota winters to know when a storm meant business, and this one was turning deadly. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Chance, struggled forward with labored breaths that plumed white in the frigid air. "Just a bit further, boy," Archer muttered, though he had no idea where shelter might be found. His original plan to reach the old Whitman cabin before nightfall had been thwarted by the unexpected blizzard. The wind shifted suddenly, and Archer caught sight of something dark against the endless white. At first, he thought it might be a fallen tree or perhaps a bear, though hibernation season was well underway. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself into something that stopped his heart cold. A body lay half buried in the snow. Archer dismounted quickly, his boots sinking deep as he trudged toward the figure. A woman, he realized, her face pale as the snow around her. Dark hair spilled from beneath a thin woolen bonnet, and her cloak, hardly adequate for such weather, was crusted with ice. For a terrible moment he thought he'd stumbled upon a corpse, then her eyelids fluttered. "Madam," Archer knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face. "Can you hear me?" Her lips, tinged blue with cold, moved slightly, though no sound emerged. She was alive, but barely. Without hesitation, Archer scooped her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, even with her sodden clothes. Returning to Chance, he managed to drape her across the saddle before mounting behind her. He cradled her body against his chest, willing whatever warmth he had to transfer to her frozen form. "Hold on," he whispered, though he doubted she could hear. "Just hold on." The Whitman cabin couldn't be far now. Old Jim Whitman had been dead 3 years, but the hunting cabin he'd built remained a landmark for travelers. Archer had used it himself during cattle drives, and he knew it contained a fireplace and, if luck was with him, dry wood. An hour later, with the light fading fast, Archer spotted the cabin's outline through the curtain of snow. Relief flooded through him as he guided Chance toward the small structure. The woman had not stirred, and fear gnawed at him that he might have been too late after all. The cabin door was frozen shut, requiring Archer to kick it open with his boot. Inside, a layer of dust covered everything, but the roof was intact and the walls kept out the wind. He laid the woman gently on the floor while he quickly set about making a fire with the stack of wood mercifully left by the last visitor. Once flames licked hungrily at the kindling, Archer turned his attention back to his charge. Her skin felt like ice, and her breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. He knew enough about surviving in cold country to understand that her wet clothes would kill her if not removed. "I'm sorry, madam," he said awkwardly as he began to unfasten her cloak. "This ain't proper, but it's necessary." He worked quickly, professional in his movements as he removed her outer garments. Beneath the cloak, her dress was simple but well made, suggesting she was no transient. He covered her with his own blanket from his saddlebag, then added his coat for good measure. With the woman situated near the fire, Archer tended to Chance, bringing the horse around to the lean-to at the back of the cabin where he'd be protected from the worst of the storm. He returned with his remaining supplies and sat down heavily beside the fireplace, watching the woman's face in the flickering light. Who was she? How had she come to be alone in such conditions? No horse had been nearby, no sign of a wagon or traveling companions. It was as if she had materialized from the blizzard itself. As the cabin warmed, color gradually returned to her cheeks. Her breathing steadied, and Archer allowed himself a moment of hope. He melted snow in his coffee pot, then soaked his bandana in the water and gently wiped frost from her face. Her eyes opened suddenly, wide with fear and confusion. "Easy now," Archer said softly, pulling back to give her space. "You're safe." The woman tried to sit up, then fell back with a gasp of pain. Her eyes, Archer noticed, were a striking shade of green like spring grass after rain. "Where?" Her voice cracked, dry from cold and disuse. "Whitman Cabin, about 30 miles northeast of Lusk," Archer replied, offering her water. "Found you half frozen in the snow. I'm Archer James. I ranch south of here." She accepted the water with trembling hands. Tessa Valentine." "What happened to you, Miss Valentine? Where are your traveling companions?" A shadow passed over her face. "There were no companions, just me." "Madam, forgive my bluntness, but no one travels these parts alone in winter, especially not a woman." Her voice had regained some strength enough to convey indignation. "I had little choice in the matter." Archer nodded slowly. "I didn't mean offense. You need rest now. Questions can wait till morning." Tessa's eyelids drooped despite her apparent desire to explain herself. Exhaustion and the trauma of near freezing claimed her, and she slipped back into sleep. Archer settled himself against the wall, rifle across his lap. The storm showed no signs of abating, howling around the cabin like a pack of wolves. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for tonight they had warmth, shelter, and the simple miracle of survival. Morning arrived with eerie silence, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the night. Sunlight streamed through the cabin's single window, illuminating motes of dust and the sleeping form of Tessa Valentine. Archer had dozed fitfully, waking often to check on both his charge and the fire. Now he stiffly rose and stepped outside to assess their situation. The world had been transformed, buried under feet of pristine snow that glittered like diamond dust in the early light. The sky stretched endlessly blue above, with no hint of the previous day's fury. When he returned inside, Tessa was awake, struggling to sit up. "Careful," Archer cautioned, moving to help her. "You nearly died yesterday." "I remember," she said, her voice stronger than the night before. "You found me in the snow." Archer nodded, busying himself with rekindling the fire. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo, but alive. Thanks to you." He shrugged off her gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "Not anyone would have been out in that blizzard to begin with," Tessa countered. She pulled his coat more tightly around her shoulders. "I suppose you want to know how I ended up there." "It's your business," Archer said, though curiosity burned within him. "But knowing might help me figure out how to get you where you're headed." Tessa's eyes darted to the door, then back to Archer. Something like wariness flickered across her face before she spoke. "I was traveling to Deadwood by stagecoach. There were 4 other passengers." Her fingers twisted in the blanket. 3 days out from Cheyenne, we were attacked." Archer's expression darkened. "Indians?" "No," Tessa shook her head firmly. "White men, road agents. They shot the driver and guard without warning." Her voice remained steady, though her knuckles whitened. "They robbed everyone, then set fire to the coach. And the other passengers." Her silence answered his question. "How did you escape?" Archer asked quietly. "I played dead after one of them struck me." Tessa touched a bruise on her temple that Archer hadn't noticed before. "When they were busy with the others, I ran. I just ran until I couldn't anymore." Archer absorbed this information with a grim nod. Road agents were growing bolder throughout the territory, emboldened by the sparse law enforcement and the promise of rich pickings from travelers headed to the gold fields. "When was this?" 2 days ago, I think. I lost track of time. 2 days in this weather on foot. It was a miracle she'd survived at all. "Well, Miss Valentine, you're safe now," Archer said, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "Once you're stronger, I'll take you to Lusk. The sheriff there can help you contact your people." A shadow crossed her face. "I have no people to contact. I was traveling to Deadwood to take a position as a schoolteacher." The revelation surprised Archer. He'd assumed she was a mail-order bride or perhaps visiting family. A schoolteacher traveling alone made little sense, but he didn't press the issue. "I see. Well, regardless, we can't stay here indefinitely. Provisions are limited, and this cabin isn't meant for extended habitation." Tessa nodded, accepting the coffee he offered. "How far is your ranch?" 2 days' ride in good conditions. With this snow and sharing a horse, 3, maybe 4. "I can't ask you to take me all that way," Tessa protested. "Lusk will be fine." Archer considered their options. The snow would make travel difficult in any direction. Lusk was closer, but barely a settlement, a handful of buildings serving mostly as a way station for travelers. His ranch, while further, would offer better shelter and safety. "Let's not decide yet," he said finally. "Today you rest. Tomorrow we'll see how the weather holds." They passed the day in the small cabin, Archer venturing out only to care for Chance and to hunt a jackrabbit that became their evening meal. Tessa slept intermittently, her body recovering from its ordeal. When awake, she proved to be an intelligent conversationalist, well-read despite what Archer assumed was a modest upbringing. "Where are you from originally?" he asked as they shared the rabbit stew. "Ohio," Tessa answered, "a small town you've never heard of." "My father was the minister there until he died last year." "And your mother?" "Gone since I was 10. It was just father and me." She stirred her stew thoughtfully. "When he passed, there seemed little reason to stay. I saw an advertisement for teachers in the Dakota Territory and thought it might be a new beginning." Archer nodded, understanding the pull of new beginnings better than most. "It's a hard land, but honest. Those who come for the right reasons often find what they're looking for." "And what were your reasons, Mr. James?" Tessa asked, her green eyes studying him with interest. Archer stared into the fire. "Freedom, I suppose. After the war, Virginia didn't feel like home anymore. You fought for the Confederacy, I fought for Virginia," he corrected quietly. "But that's ancient history now." Tessa seemed to sense his reluctance to elaborate. "Well, I'm grateful our paths crossed, regardless of what brought us both here." Archer offered a small smile, the first Tessa had seen from the stoic cowboy. It transformed his weathered face, softening the hard lines around his eyes. "Get some rest, Miss Valentine. Tomorrow will be a long day." The second morning dawned clear and cold. Tessa's strength had improved markedly, though she still moved with deliberate care. Archer had decided they would attempt to reach Lusk, a journey he estimated would take most of the day given the conditions. "Can you ride?" he asked as they prepared to leave the cabin. "I grew up riding," Tessa assured him, though doubt tinged her voice, "though perhaps not in snow this deep." Archer helped her mount Chance, then swung up behind her. The arrangement was uncomfortably intimate but necessary. Tessa sat rigidly at first, clearly conscious of the impropriety, but as they progressed through the deep drifts, practicality won out. She leaned back against Archer's chest, accepting his steadying arm around her waist. The landscape stretched white and pristine around them, broken only by occasional stands of pine and distant bluffs. The sun cast everything in brilliant light, almost painful to behold. Despite the bitter cold, there was undeniable beauty in the untouched expanse. "It's magnificent," Tessa breathed, her words forming clouds in the frigid air, like an ocean of snow. Archer, who had long since grown accustomed to the vistas of the high plains, found himself seeing it anew through her eyes. "It has its moments," he admitted. "Though come summer you might prefer the green." "I hope I'm still here to see it," she said quietly. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, stopping occasionally to rest Chance. Around midday, Archer grew increasingly vigilant, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. "Is something wrong?" Tessa asked, noting his tension. "Not sure," he replied, "but something doesn't feel right." As if summoned by his unease, riders appeared on a ridge to their west, 3 men on horseback, watching them with obvious interest. "Friends of yours?" Tessa asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Archer's arm tightened almost imperceptibly around her waist. "No, madam." "And I'd wager they're not planning a social call." The riders began to descend toward them, spreading out in a manner that left little doubt about their intentions. "Road agents?" Tessa whispered, fear evident in her voice. "Likely." Archer's mind raced through their options, none of them promising. Chance was a good horse, but carrying double and already tired from pushing through deep snow, they couldn't outrun the approaching men. Fighting was equally unappealing, with Tessa at risk of being caught in crossfire. "What do we do?" Tessa asked, her body tense against his. Before Archer could answer, a shot rang out, the bullet whizzing harmlessly overhead, a warning rather than a serious attempt to hit them. "Hold up there." One of the riders called out, a burly man with a red beard visible even at this distance. Archer reined in Chance, his free hand moving toward the rifle in its scabbard. "Stay calm," he murmured to Tessa. Let me do the talking. The three men approached, forming a loose semicircle around them. Up close, they looked even more menacing, unshaven, hard-eyed men dressed in mismatched clothing clearly taken from various victims. The red-bearded man appeared to be their leader, sitting his horse with casual confidence, a Colt revolver held loosely in his gloved hand. "Well now, what do we have here?" Redbeard's voice carried a southern drawl. "Bit cold for a pleasure ride, ain't it? Just passing through," Archer replied evenly. Heading to Lusk, Redbeard's eyes fixed on Tessa, a slow smile spreading beneath his unkempt beard. "Ain't she a pretty thing?" "Looks familiar somehow." Tessa stiffened, and Archer knew immediately these were the same men who had attacked the stagecoach. Recognition dawned in the man's eyes at almost the same moment. "I'll be damned," Redbeard said softly. "You're that woman from the coach." "Thought you'd frozen to death by now." "Gentlemen," Archer interjected, "we don't want trouble, we don't have anything worth taking." One of the other men, thin and weasel-faced, laughed. "That ain't strictly true, is it? You got a fine horse there, and your lady friend." "Well, she might be worth something to the right buyer." Archer's expression remained neutral, though his mind calculated angles and distances, wondering if he could reach his rifle before one of them shot him. The odds weren't good. "Here's what's going to happen," Redbeard announced. "You're going to climb down nice and easy, leave the lady and the horse, and start walking. You do that, and maybe you live to tell about it." "I can't do that," Archer said quietly. Redbeard sighed theatrically. "Then I reckon you'll die right here." He raised his pistol, aiming it squarely at Archer's chest. What happened next occurred so rapidly that later, Tessa would struggle to recall the exact sequence of events. A shot rang out, but not from Redbeard's gun. The weasel-faced man to their right suddenly pitched backward off his horse, a crimson stain blossoming on his chest. More gunfire erupted from behind them, and Archer seized the moment of confusion to pull his rifle free. He fired at Redbeard, catching him in the shoulder and sending him reeling. The third road agent wheeled his horse around, firing wildly as he sought the source of the ambush. "Down," Archer commanded, pulling Tessa sideways as bullets whistled past them. Chance, panicked by the gunfire, reared up, nearly throwing them both before Archer regained control. From behind a nearby ridge, 4 riders emerged, rifles at the ready. They wore the distinctive badges of U.S. Marshals, a sight that brought immeasurable relief to both Archer and Tessa. The remaining road agents attempted to flee but were quickly overtaken. Redbeard, wounded but defiant, was dragged from his horse and secured with handcuffs. The lead marshal, a grizzled man with a silver mustache, approached Archer and Tessa. "You folks all right?" Archer nodded, still holding Tessa protectively. "Thanks to you, good timing." "Been tracking these boys for 2 weeks, the marshal explained. "They hit a stagecoach south of here, killed 5 people. His gaze settled on Tessa. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, madam?" "I was there," Tessa said, her voice steady despite the tremor that ran through her body. "I'm the only one who survived." The marshal's eyebrows rose. "Then I'd say you're due some luck. We found the wreckage yesterday, been following their trail since. Never expected to find a survivor." "She's had a rough go," Archer said. "We were heading to Lusk to report what happened." "We'll take these vermin there ourselves," the marshal said. "You're welcome to ride along with us, safer that way." Archer glanced at Tessa, who nodded slightly. "We'd be obliged," he told the marshal. The journey to Lusk took the remainder of the day, with the marshals and their prisoners setting a careful pace through the snow. Tessa remained quiet for much of the ride, the encounter having clearly shaken her. Archer maintained his protective position, his arm steady around her waist, a silent promise of safety. Lusk came into view as the sun began to set a small collection of buildings huddled against the vast emptiness of the prairie. Despite its modest size, the settlement offered a welcome return to civilization after their ordeal. The town consisted of a general store, a small hotel, a saloon, and a few other establishments servicing travelers along the Cheyenne to Deadwood route. The marshals headed directly for the sheriff's office, a small building with a single cell that would barely accommodate their prisoners. Archer helped Tessa dismount outside the hotel, her legs unsteady after the long ride. "You should rest," he said gently. "I'll see about getting you a room." Tessa caught his arm. "What about you?" "I'll find a place at the livery, most likely. Don't worry about me." The hotel proprietor, a plump woman named Mrs. Donovan, took one look at Tessa's exhausted face and bruised temple and immediately bustled into action, calling for hot water and food. She showed them to the hotel's best room, a modest but clean chamber with an actual bed instead of a cot. "You poor dear," Mrs. Donovan clucked, helping Tessa remove her borrowed coat. "Let's get you warmed up properly." Archer lingered awkwardly at the doorway. "I should check on Chance, then speak with the marshal." Tessa looked up, fatigue evident in every line of her body. "Thank you, Mr. James, for everything." He nodded once, then turned to leave. "Mr. James," Mrs. Donovan called after him. "Once you've seen to your business, there's a hot meal waiting for you downstairs. No arguments," she added when he began to protest. Chance was settled in the livery stable, where the ostler promised extra oats in exchange for Archer's coin. At the sheriff's office, Archer found the marshal completing paperwork regarding the captured road agents. "Nasty bunch," the marshal commented as Archer entered. "Been terrorizing the route from Cheyenne to the Black Hills for months now. You and the lady were lucky." "She's the lucky one," Archer corrected. "Survived the attack, then nearly froze to death before I found her. She mentioned that, said you saved her life." The marshal studied Archer curiously. "What takes you through these parts anyway?" "I was in Cheyenne on business, heading back to my ranch near the Belle Fourche. Long ride." Archer shrugged. "I've made it before." The marshal signed his document with a flourish. "Well, we'll be escorting these men to Cheyenne for trial. The lady's testimony will be needed eventually, but for now she should rest and recover." "What about Deadwood? She was headed there to teach." The marshal shook his head. "That position's likely filled by now. News travels slow, but not that slow. She's been missing nearly a week." The realization struck Archer forcefully. Tessa had lost everything, her possessions in the stagecoach fire, her intended position, possibly even her savings if the road agents had taken it. She was stranded in a strange territory with winter closing in and no prospects. "I see," he said finally. "Thank you, Marshal." When Archer returned to the hotel, he found Mrs. Donovan true to her word. A hearty stew awaited him, along with fresh bread and coffee. He ate mechanically, his mind preoccupied with Tessa's predicament. "She's resting now, Mrs. Donovan informed him, refilling his coffee cup. "Poor thing was dead on her feet, said she hadn't had a proper bath or meal in days." "She's been through a lot," Archer agreed. Mrs. Donovan studied him with shrewd eyes. "You care for her?" It wasn't a question, and Archer didn't treat it as one. He sipped his coffee instead. "What happens to her now?" Mrs. Donovan pressed. "I don't know," Archer admitted. "She's lost everything. The position in Deadwood is probably gone." Mrs. Donovan nodded thoughtfully. "Well, she can stay here a few days. I could use the help anyway, with winter travelers coming through." Archer felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "That's generous of you." "Not generosity, Mr. James, business. Pretty young woman like that won't be without options for long." She gave him a pointed look. "Unless, of course, someone's already spoken for her." Archer set down his cup with deliberate care. "Miss Valentine and I are barely acquaintances. I simply happened to find her in the snow, Mrs. Donovan's skeptical expression suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but she let the matter drop. "Well, she asked to speak with you in the morning before you leave." The thought of leaving struck Archer with unexpected force. He had his ranch to return to, cattle that needed tending even in winter, responsibilities that couldn't be neglected indefinitely. Yet the idea of riding away, of leaving Tessa Valentine behind in Lusk, created an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. "I'll be here," he said simply. Morning found Archer in the hotel's small dining room, watching snow fall gently outside the window. He'd slept poorly, his dreams haunted by images of Tessa lying frozen in the snow, of road agents' bullets finding their mark, of returning to his ranch alone. Mrs. Donovan brought him breakfast without being asked, eggs, bacon, and biscuits still steaming from the oven. "She'll be down shortly," the woman said with a knowing smile that Archer chose to ignore. When Tessa entered the dining room, Archer almost didn't recognize her. Mrs. Donovan had clearly loaned her clothing, a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes, and her dark hair was neatly arranged in a practical style. The bruise on her temple remained visible, but color had returned to her cheeks, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that impressed him. "Good morning, Mr. James," she said, taking the seat across from him. "Miss Valentine," he nodded, "you look recovered." A small smile touched her lips. "Amazing what a bath and proper sleep can accomplish." Her expression grew serious. "I wanted to thank you properly before you continue your journey." "No thanks necessary," Archer said automatically. "Nevertheless, you have them. Few men would have stopped in that blizzard. Fewer still would have shown the care and respect you did." She met his eyes directly. "You're a good man, Archer James." The use of his first name created an unexpected warmth in his chest. "I'm glad I could help. Have you decided what you'll do now?" Tessa glanced toward Mrs. Donovan, who was pretending not to eavesdrop from behind the counter. "Mrs. Donovan has offered me employment here at the hotel. Temporary, but it's something." "That's good," Archer said, ignoring the twinge of disappointment he felt. What had he expected? That she would ask to accompany him to his ranch. That would be improper, impossible, really. They barely knew each other. "Yes," Tessa agreed, though something in her tone suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with the arrangement either. "The marshal says I'll need to travel to Cheyenne eventually to testify against those men, but not until spring." Archer nodded, searching for something more to say. The easy conversation they'd shared in the cabin seemed suddenly elusive. "When will you leave?" Tessa asked finally. "Today, I reckon. Weather's clear enough, and I've been away from the ranch too long already." "Of course." Tessa looked down at her hands, folded neatly on the table. "Well, I wish you safe travels, Mr. James." The formality stung, though Archer couldn't say why. He'd be just another memory to her soon, a brief encounter during a difficult time. Why should that bother him? "And you, Miss Valentine." "I hope," he paused, uncertain what he hoped for her, "that she'd find happiness, success, that their paths might cross again someday." Before he could finish the thought, the hotel door burst open, admitting a flurry of snow and a red-faced boy of about 12. "Marshal wants everyone at the sheriff's office right away," the boy announced breathlessly. "Prisoners escaped in the night, killed Deputy Wilson." The dining room erupted in alarmed chatter. Archer rose immediately, his hand moving instinctively to his sidearm. "Stay here," he told Tessa, whose face had gone pale. "I'll find out what's happening." Outside, the main street of Lusk had transformed into a scene of barely controlled chaos. Men with rifles gathered in small groups, and the marshal could be seen organizing them into search parties. Archer approached quickly, his expression grim. "What happened?" he demanded. The marshal looked up, recognizing him. "Those bastards we brought in yesterday. Someone helped them escape, had to be an accomplice from outside, slit my deputy's throat and took off with our horses and weapons." "Any idea which way they went?" "North, we think. Tracks are already covered by the new snow." The marshal's face was haggard with grief and anger. "I'm sending men in all directions, but with this weather." Archer understood the unspoken conclusion. The road agents could be miles away by now, virtually untraceable in the fresh snowfall. "Red Beard, their leader, he mentioned something before they knocked him out," the marshal added, his voice lowering. "Said they weren't finished with the schoolteacher woman. Said she could identify their whole gang." A cold that had nothing to do with the winter air settled in Archer's gut. "She's in danger." "Reckon so. I'd take her with us to Cheyenne right now, but with those killers out there." The marshal shook his head, might be walking into an ambush. Archer's mind raced, considering options. Lusk was hardly defensible, with only a handful of men capable of offering protection. The road agents knew exactly where to find Tessa. If they returned in force, the outcome could be disastrous. "I need to get her somewhere safe," Archer said, decision crystallizing in his mind. The marshal studied him thoughtfully. "Your ranch, maybe," Archer nodded. "It's remote, defensible, and they don't know about it. It's a long ride in this weather. Better than waiting here for them to return." The marshal couldn't argue with that logic. Take what supplies you need. I'll have my men watch the northern trails, try to buy you some time." Archer returned to the hotel to find Tessa and Mrs. Donovan in anxious conversation. When Tessa saw his expression, she fell silent, seeming to read the gravity of the situation in his eyes. "You need to pack whatever you can carry," Archer told her without preamble. "We're leaving," Tessa repeated. "But why? Those men are coming back for you," Archer said bluntly. "You're the only witness who can identify them all. The marshal thinks they'll try to silence you." Tessa's face paled, but she nodded resolutely. "Where are we going?" "My ranch. It's a few days' ride, but it's the safest option right now." Mrs. Donovan immediately bustled into action. "I'll pack food. You'll need warm clothing too. I have some things that might fit you, dear." Within the hour, Archer and Tessa were mounted on Chance, with a packhorse borrowed from the livery carrying additional supplies. The marshal provided ammunition and a spare pistol, which Archer insisted Tessa take, though she handled it gingerly, clearly uncomfortable with firearms. "Keep to the high ground where you can," the marshal advised as they prepared to depart. "Avoid the main trails." "I'll send word when we catch these vermin." Archer nodded, his expression solemn. "If we're not at the ranch, I've got a line cabin about 10 miles southwest of the main house. We might hole up there if the weather turns." They set out as noon approached, leaving Lusk behind under a sky heavy with the promise of more snow. Archer pushed a hard pace initially, wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and the town before nightfall. Tessa rode behind him without complaint, though he could feel the tension in her body. "Are you all right?" he asked after several hours of silence. "I'm bringing nothing but trouble to your door," she replied, her voice barely audible over the wind. "You should have left me in Lusk." Archer turned slightly in the saddle to look at her. "Is that what you wanted?" "No," she admitted, "but it would have been the sensible thing." "Sensible isn't always right," Archer said, facing forward again. "Besides, my ranch needs a teacher." The statement hung between them, unexpected and unexplained. Tessa didn't press for clarification, and Archer offered none, unsure himself why he'd said it. They made camp that night in a sheltered ravine, using a small stand of cottonwoods for additional protection from the wind. Archer built a fire, keeping it small to minimize the chance of detection. They ate a simple meal of jerky and biscuits, neither having much appetite after the day's events. "Tell me about your ranch," Tessa said as they sat close to the fire, wrapped in blankets against the deepening cold. Archer poked at the embers thoughtfully. "It's not much compared to some. 2,000 acres, maybe 100 head of cattle. Cabin I built myself. Stream runs through the northern section, never runs dry, even in summer. It sounds lovely." "It's enough," Archer said simply. "Took me 5 years to save enough to buy the land, another 2 to build it into something worthwhile." "And you manage it alone?" "I hire help during calving season and for the bigger roundups. Rest of the time, it's just me." Tessa studied his profile in the firelight. "Don't you get lonely?" The question caught him off guard. Did he? He'd grown so accustomed to solitude that he rarely considered its absence a deprivation. Yet something about the past few days, about having someone to talk with, to care for, to consider, had awakened an awareness of what his life lacked. "I suppose I do," he admitted finally. "Though I hadn't given it much thought until now." Tessa nodded, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "I understand. After my father died, I was alone in our house for months. At first, the silence was unbearable. Then, gradually, it became normal. I stopped noticing it." "What made you decide to come west?" Archer asked, curious about the decision that had nearly cost Tessa her life. She smiled faintly. "Adventure, partly. The advertisement made teaching in Dakota Territory sound romantic, bringing education to frontier children, helping to civilize the wilderness. And the other part," Tessa's smile faded, "running away, I suppose. My father's congregation expected me to marry his replacement, a widower with 3 young children. A sensible arrangement, everyone said. But not what you wanted." "No," she agreed softly. "I wanted something else, something more." Archer nodded, understanding perfectly. "Wasn't that what had driven him west after the war? the desire for something more than the predetermined path laid out before him in Virginia. "Well," he said after a moment, "I can't promise adventure, but the territory certainly delivers on wilderness." Tessa laughed, the sound bright in the darkness surrounding them. "I've noticed. Though I could do with a bit less adventure of the nearly freezing-to-death variety," Archer smiled, finding her laughter unexpectedly warming. "I'll do my best to ensure that doesn't happen again." They fell silent, watching the fire burn down to coals. When Tessa finally spoke again, her voice was edged with fatigue but determined. "Archer, thank you, not just for finding me, but for caring what happens next." Something shifted in Archer's chest at her words, a loosening of a tightness he hadn't realized was there. "Get some sleep, Tessa. We've got a long ride tomorrow." The next 2 days passed in a rhythm of riding, making camp and breaking it again at dawn. The weather remained cold but clear, allowing them to make better progress than Archer had initially hoped. They encountered no other travelers, for which both were grateful. The fewer people who knew their route, the better. Tessa proved to be a resilient traveling companion, never complaining despite the discomfort of long hours in the saddle and sleeping on frozen ground. She asked intelligent questions about the land they passed through, about ranching, about Archer's life before coming west. Gradually, Archer found himself sharing stories he'd told no one else about his childhood in Virginia, his experiences during the war, his dreams for the future of his ranch. In return, Tessa spoke of growing up as a minister's daughter, of her love for books and learning, of her hope to someday open her own school rather than simply teaching in someone else's. Their conversations flowed easily, punctuated by comfortable silences that felt neither awkward nor empty. By the afternoon of the third day, the landscape began to change subtly. The endless rolling prairie gave way to more varied terrain, hills rising in the distance, patches of pine and spruce breaking the monotony of white. "We're getting close," Archer announced as they crested a rise overlooking a broad valley. "Ranch is about 5 miles ahead, just beyond that line of trees." Tessa leaned forward slightly, eager for her first glimpse of the place that would be her sanctuary, its beautiful country. "It grows on you," Archer agreed. "Different kind of beauty than back east. Harder maybe, but more honest." They rode down into the valley, following a stream now frozen solid beneath its blanket of snow. As they approached the tree line, Archer grew increasingly alert, scanning their surroundings with careful attention. "Something wrong?" Tessa asked, noting his tension. "Just being cautious, don't expect trouble, but best to be prepared." They emerged from the trees to find a sight that made Archer pull up short, a curse escaping his lips before he could stop it. Ahead of them, where his ranch house should have stood, was a blackened skeleton of charred logs and collapsed roofing. Wisps of smoke still rose from the ruins, suggesting the fire was recent. "No," Archer breathed, urging Chance forward at a gallop. They reached the burned-out shell of the cabin in minutes. Archer dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, striding toward the ruins with disbelief etched on his features. Tessa followed more slowly, stunned by the devastation before them. The cabin was completely destroyed, with only the stone chimney standing intact amid the wreckage. The barn nearby appeared untouched, however, and as they approached, Archer gave a low whistle. A whinny answered from inside, followed by the emergence of a roan gelding. "Rusty," Archer said with palpable relief. "At least they didn't get him. Who did this?" Tessa asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Archer knelt to examine tracks in the snow around the ruins. 3 riders, same ones who escaped from Lusk, I'd wager. They must have ridden straight here while we were taking the longer route. "But how did they know where to find your ranch?" Archer's expression darkened. "I registered my brand with the territorial office in Cheyenne. Anyone who knows my name could find the location." He stood, brushing ash from his hands. "They're sending a message. They know who helped you, and they want me to know they know." Tessa's heart sank. "This is my fault. If I hadn't..." "Stop," Archer cut her off firmly. "This isn't your doing. Those men made their choices." He surveyed the destruction again, his jaw tight. "Logs can be replaced. What matters is they didn't catch us here." Despite his pragmatic words, Tessa could see the pain in his eyes. This place represented years of work, of dreams built log by painstaking log. To see it destroyed so callously would devastate anyone. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. Archer turned toward the hills rising to the west. "The line cabin, it's smaller but solid, we'll head there before dark." They took time only to gather what supplies remained in the barn: additional ammunition, some preserved food, tools that might prove useful. Rusty was hitched to lead behind them, and they set off with the sun already sinking toward the horizon. The line cabin proved to be a sturdy, if modest, structure nestled against a rocky outcropping that provided natural protection from the northern winds. Inside, it contained little more than a small fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and basic cooking implements. It was, however, intact and defensible. Archer set about making the cabin habitable while Tessa tended to the horses. They worked in silence, each absorbed in private thoughts about their situation. When darkness fell completely, they shared a simple meal by lantern light, the reality of their circumstances settling heavily upon them. "They'll come looking for us," Archer said finally, stating what both already knew. "They've demonstrated they won't stop until they find you." Tessa nodded, her face pale but composed. "What options do we have?" "Not many," Archer admitted. "We could try for Deadwood, but it's a difficult journey this time of year, or push on to my nearest neighbor's ranch about 30 miles northeast. Thatcher might take us in, but I'd be bringing danger to his door too, or we could stay and fight," Tessa suggested quietly. Archer looked at her with surprise. "That's not your responsibility, isn't it? Those men are hunting me. They destroyed your home because of me." Her green eyes met his steadily. "I won't run forever, Archer, and I won't let others keep paying the price for my survival." Something shifted in Archer's perception of the woman sitting across from him. Beneath the refined exterior of a schoolteacher, Tessa Valentine possessed a core of steel he hadn't fully appreciated until now. "It would be dangerous," he said, testing her resolve. "Even with the advantage of position, we're outnumbered. Then we'll need to be smarter than they are." Tessa's expression was determined. "You know this land, they don't. That has to count for something." Archer considered their situation from a tactical perspective. The cabin was well positioned, with clear lines of sight in most directions. He had weapons, ammunition, and intimate knowledge of the surrounding terrain. If they prepared carefully, they might stand a chance. "All right," he said finally, "but we do this my way, no heroics." Tessa smiled faintly. "I'm a schoolteacher, Mr. James, not a gunfighter. I'll follow your lead." They spent the next day preparing the cabin for a potential siege. Archer showed Tessa how to reload his spare rifle and reviewed basic shooting techniques, though he hoped it wouldn't come to her having to defend herself. They brought additional firewood inside, melted snow for water, and positioned furniture to provide cover if bullets started flying. "I'll take first watch tonight," Archer said as evening approached. "You should rest while you can." Tessa nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily. She settled on the narrow bed, watching as Archer checked his weapons one final time before taking position near the window. "Archer," she said softly, "if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you," he interrupted firmly. "But if it does," she persisted, "I want you to know that these past days, despite everything, have meant something to me. You've shown me kindness when you had no reason to, and I won't forget that, whatever comes next." Archer turned to look at her, his expression softening in the fading light. "Get some sleep, Tessa. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next." Morning arrived without incident, bringing with it a fresh layer of snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening white expanse. Archer, who had eventually allowed Tessa to take a watch while he grabbed a few hours' sleep, stood on the cabin's small porch surveying their surroundings with critical eyes. "If they come, it will likely be from there," he said, pointing toward a draw that offered the most covered approach to the cabin. "We'll have some warning if they try it, but not much." Tessa joined him, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "How long do we wait?" 3 days, Archer decided. "If they haven't found us by then, we'll risk moving on to Thatcher's place. From there, we could reach Deadwood with proper supplies and escorts. The day passed with excruciating slowness, each hour stretching into the next with no sign of pursuit. They took turns watching, ate sparingly from their limited supplies, and spoke little, the tension of anticipation weighing heavily upon them both. As dusk approached, Archer's vigilance increased. Experience had taught him that attacks often came at transitional moments: dawn, dusk, during storms when visibility was poor. The fading light created shadows that could conceal movement, making it the perfect time for men with ill intent to approach. He was about to suggest Tessa move away from the window when he caught a flicker of movement at the edge of the tree line, about 200 yards from the cabin. "Get down," he said quietly, motioning her away from the exposed position. "They're here." Tessa moved quickly to the center of the room, crouching behind the table they had positioned for this purpose. Archer took up position beside the window, his rifle ready but not yet visible to anyone watching the cabin. "How many?" Tessa whispered. "At least 2 that I can see." "Likely the third is trying to circle around back." Archer's voice was calm, focused. "Remember what I told you. Stay low, stay quiet. If shooting starts, make for the root cellar access. It's not much, but it's better cover than in here." The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. Outside, darkness gathered more fully, making it increasingly difficult to track movement. Archer remained motionless, watching, waiting for the inevitable. The first shot shattered the window beside him, sending glass fragments spraying across the cabin floor. Archer dropped to one knee but didn't return fire immediately, waiting to confirm the shooter's position. A second shot splintered wood near the doorframe, followed quickly by a third that embedded itself in the log wall with a solid thunk. "They're trying to draw us out," Archer muttered. "Make us waste ammunition." He moved to a different window, one that remained intact, and carefully sighted along his rifle. In the gathering darkness, he could make out a shadowy figure crouched behind a fallen log about 100 yards from the cabin. Taking a deep breath, Archer squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was deafening in the confined space. Outside, a cry of pain suggested his shot had found its mark. "Got one," he said grimly, already moving to another position, "but that'll make the others more cautious." For several minutes, silence reigned. Then, without warning, a new sound reached them: the crack and whoosh of flames. Archer moved quickly to the rear window and cursed under his breath. "They've set fire to the woodshed, trying to smoke us out." Tessa's eyes widened with alarm. "Will it spread to the cabin?" "Not if the snow holds, but the smoke might become a problem." Archer's mind raced through their diminishing options. "We need to end this now before they get desperate enough to try something worse." Making a swift decision, Archer moved to Tessa's side. "I'm going out the back. There's a depression about 50 yards east of the cabin. If I can reach it unseen, I can flank them." "That's too dangerous," Tessa protested. "You'll be exposed, only for a moment. The smoke will provide some cover." He handed her his pistol. 6 shots. "Use them only if someone tries to enter. Aim for the center of the body, not the head. Easier target." Before she could argue further, Archer moved to the rear of the cabin. He paused only long enough to check that the way appeared clear, then slipped out into the gathering darkness. Tessa remained frozen in position, the weight of the pistol unfamiliar and frightening in her hand. Seconds stretched into minutes with no sound except the distant crackling of the burning woodshed. Had Archer made it to cover? Was he even now working his way around behind their attackers? Or had he walked into an ambush? A sudden movement at the window drove these questions from her mind. A face appeared, briefly bearded, dirty, with eyes that reflected the distant flames. Red Beard himself, the leader of the road agents who had attacked her stagecoach. He was testing whether the cabin was still defended. Tessa raised the pistol with shaking hands but hesitated. Should she fire? Archer had told her to wait until someone actually tried to enter. If she shot now and missed, she would reveal her position and lose the advantage of uncertainty. The decision was made for her when the door suddenly burst open, kicked in by a boot belonging to the third outlaw, a tall, lanky man with a scar running down one side of his face. He entered with his gun raised, sweeping it around the seemingly empty room. come out, schoolteacher," he called mockingly. "We know you're in here." Tessa remained motionless behind the table, the pistol now aimed at the intruder's chest. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but before she could fire, two shots rang out in rapid succession from somewhere outside. The scarred man spun toward the sound, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Tessa needed. She squeezed the trigger, the pistol bucking violently in her hands. The outlaw staggered, looking down in shock at the blossoming red stain on his shirt. He raised his own weapon, but Tessa fired again, her second shot catching him in the shoulder and spinning him around. He collapsed to the cabin floor, his gun clattering away across the rough planks. Outside, more gunfire erupted, 3 shots, then 2 more, followed by an eerie silence. Tessa remained frozen, the pistol still pointed at the fallen outlaw who groaned but made no move to rise. "Tessa," Archer's voice from outside the cabin. "I'm here," she called back, her voice surprisingly steady despite the trembling that had overtaken her body. "One is down in here." Archer appeared in the doorway moments later, his face smeared with dirt and what looked like blood. He took in the scene with a quick glance. Tessa still crouched behind the table, the wounded outlaw on the floor. "Red beard?" she asked anxiously. "Won't be troubling anyone again," Archer replied grimly. "Neither will his friend." Relief washed over Tessa in a dizzying wave. It was over. The men who had hunted her, who had killed her fellow passengers and destroyed Archer's ranch, were no longer a threat. With that realization came another: she had shot a man, possibly killed him. The pistol suddenly felt impossibly heavy in her hands. She set it down carefully on the table, then looked up at Archer with eyes that begged for reassurance that she had done what was necessary. Understanding her unspoken question, Archer crossed the room and knelt beside her. Without a word, he drew her into his arms, holding her as the first tears came not of fear or remorse, but of relief and released tension. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now." When dawn broke the following morning, it revealed the aftermath of the night's violence with stark clarity. 2 bodies lay covered with canvas near the burned remains of the woodshed. The third outlaw, the one Tessa had shot, had survived the night and now sat propped against the cabin wall, his wounds bandaged but his hands securely bound. "What do we do with him?" Tessa asked as she and Archer stood on the porch, watching the sun rise over the eastern hills. "Take him to Deadwood," Archer replied. "The authorities there can hold him until the territorial marshal arrives. His testimony might help close the book on other crimes these men committed." Tessa nodded, her gaze drifting to the pristine snow surrounding the cabin, now marred by blood and footprints. "Will it ever feel completely over?" Archer considered the question seriously. "The danger is past, the rest, that takes time." They set out for Deadwood later that day, their prisoner secured on the packhorse. The journey would take several days, but with the immediate threat eliminated, they could follow more established trails and travel at a less punishing pace. As they rode, Tessa found herself contemplating what awaited her in Deadwood. The teaching position was almost certainly lost, leaving her once again without prospects in a territory far from everything familiar. The thought should have terrified her, but strangely, it didn't. Something had changed within her during the ordeal of the past weeks, a recognition of her own resilience, perhaps, or a new appreciation for the uncertainty of life. On their 3rd evening on the trail, as they made camp in a sheltered grove, Archer finally broached the subject that had clearly been on his mind. "What will you do in Deadwood?" he asked as they sat beside the fire. "If the teaching position is gone?" Tessa poked at the embers with a stick, considering. "Find work of some kind, I suppose. A town like that must need someone who can read and write, keep accounts, perhaps teach privately." Archer nodded slowly. "You could do that." "Or," Tessa prompted, sensing there was more to his thoughts. "Or you could come back with me." The words emerged with careful deliberation. "To the ranch." Tessa's breath caught. "Your ranch burned down, Archer. I'll rebuild it, better than before." His eyes met hers across the fire. "But a ranch needs more than just cattle and a cabin. It needs life." The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to put it into explicit words. Are you offering me employment, Mr. James? Tessa asked softly, giving him the opportunity to retreat if he wished. Archer's gaze remained steady. I'm offering you a home, Miss Valentine. What form that takes, that would be for us to determine. Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. That's a significant offer to make to someone you've known such a short time. Some things don't require years to recognize, Archer replied. I know enough of who you are, Tessa Valentine. I've seen your courage, your resilience, your kindness. The rest, we would learn together. The sincerity in his voice touched something deep within her. This was no impulsive proposal born of shared danger or proximity. Archer James was not a man who spoke such words lightly. There are children on neighboring ranches who lack proper schooling, he continued when she remained silent. You could teach them, build the school you talked about, and in time, perhaps. He trailed off, but Tessa could fill in the unspoken remainder of that thought. In time, perhaps there might be children of their own to teach, a family, a future built together. I'd need to think about it, she said finally, though her heart had already begun to lean toward acceptance. Archer nodded, respecting her need for reflection. Of course, Deadwood is still 2 days' ride. You have time. They reached Deadwood on a bright, cold afternoon, the mining town sprawling before them in a narrow gulch between towering pines. Unlike the neat, ordered settlements Tessa had known in Ohio, Deadwood had grown organically and chaotically. Its buildings crowded together along a winding main street that followed the creek for which the town was named. The sheriff's office was their first stop, where they delivered their prisoner and provided statements about the events at the line cabin. The sheriff, a grizzled veteran of frontier law enforcement, listened with increasing interest as their story unfolded. You're the woman from the Cheyenne stage robbery, he said to Tessa when they had finished. Word came through about that. Everyone thought you were dead. Nearly was, Tessa acknowledged. If Mr. James hadn't found me, the sheriff nodded thoughtfully. Well, you've done the territory a service bringing in this one. Those men have been terrorizing the routes between here and Cheyenne for months. He pushed a ledger across his desk. There's a reward, you know, $500 for information leading to their capture. Archer and Tessa exchanged surprised glances. That money's rightfully yours, Archer said to her. You're the one who survived to identify them. The sheriff completed some paperwork, then counted out the reward money and handed it to Tessa. $500 more money than she'd ever possessed at one time. Enough to establish herself comfortably in Deadwood or anywhere else she might choose. Their next stop was the offices of the Black Hills Pioneer, Deadwood's newspaper, where they inquired about the teaching position Tessa had originally journeyed to fill. Filled it 3 weeks ago, the editor informed them apologetically. When you didn't arrive as scheduled, the committee had to move forward. Children need schooling, after all. Tessa nodded, having expected as much. I understand. Are there other opportunities for a teacher in Deadwood? The editor scratched his beard thoughtfully. Town's growing fast. Might be room for another school, especially for the younger children. Committee meets next Tuesday if you'd like to present your credentials. They secured rooms at a respectable hotel, separate accommodations, with Archer insisting on paying for Tessa's from his own funds despite her protests. The following morning, they met for breakfast in the hotel's dining room, an unspoken understanding that a decision about their future needed to be made. The newspaper editor was encouraging about teaching prospects here, Tessa began, stirring her coffee absently. He was, Archer agreed neutrally. Deadwood's growing. You'd likely find success here. Tessa studied him across the table, noting the careful way he avoided influencing her decision. It was one of the qualities she'd come to appreciate most about Archer James, his fundamental respect for her autonomy, even when it might conflict with his own desires. I've been thinking about your offer, she said finally. Archer set down his cup, giving her his full attention. And the children on those outlying ranches deserve education as much as those in town. Tessa met his gaze directly, perhaps more given their isolation. A cautious hope flickered in Archer's eyes. They do. and your ranch will need rebuilding. An extra pair of hands wouldn't hurt." "No, they wouldn't," he agreed, the hope growing stronger. Tessa took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. "I'd like to accept your offer, Archer, to return with you and see what future we might build." The transformation in Archer's expression was remarkable, like sunrise breaking across a landscape long shrouded in darkness. The reserve that had characterized him when they first met melted away, revealing a warmth and tenderness that took Tessa's breath away. "You're certain?" he asked, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It won't be an easy life," Tessa smiled, squeezing his fingers. "I didn't come west looking for easy, Mr. James. I came looking for purpose, and I believe I've found it." They were married 3 days later in Deadwood's small church, a simple ceremony with the newspaper editor and his wife serving as witnesses. Tessa wore a new dress purchased with a small portion of her reward money, the rest safely deposited in Deadwood's bank for the rebuilding of the ranch and the establishment of her school. The journey back to Archer's land took place under far different circumstances than their flight from it. They traveled with a properly outfitted wagon containing supplies for reconstruction lumber, tools, household necessities, and the hope that comes with new beginnings. Spring was asserting itself by the time they reached the ranch, the snow receding to reveal patches of green and the first wildflowers dotting the hillsides. The charred ruins of the original cabin remained, a stark reminder of what had been lost, but neither Archer nor Tessa dwelled on it. Instead, they focused on what would rise in its place. They established themselves temporarily in the line cabin while construction of the new ranch house began. Archer hired workers from Deadwood to assist with the major structural work, but much of the finishing was done by his and Tessa's own hands. She proved surprisingly adept at practical tasks, her determination compensating for lack of experience. By late summer, the new house stood complete, larger than the original, with a dedicated room at one end specifically designed as a schoolroom. Word had spread among neighboring ranches about the teacher who had come to the James place, and by the time autumn arrived, 6 children ranging in age from 7 to 14 made the journey 3 times weekly for lessons. Tessa found profound satisfaction in teaching these frontier children, whose hunger for knowledge often exceeded that of their town-dwelling counterparts. She supplemented the basic curriculum with practical skills and stories that celebrated the unique culture developing in the territory. In the evenings, she sometimes caught Archer listening from the doorway as she read aloud, his expression suggesting he was absorbing the lessons as eagerly as his younger pupils. Their first winter as husband and wife tested them in ways neither had anticipated. The cold came early and ferociously, isolating the ranch for weeks at a time. Supplies ran low, a cow sickened and died, and on the darkest night of December, Archer himself fell through ice while checking on stranded cattle, developing a fever that terrified Tessa with its intensity. She nursed him through it with the same determination she brought to everything else, refusing to consider the possibility of failure. When his fever finally broke and he looked up at her with clear eyes for the first time in days, she wept with relief. "You found me half frozen once," she whispered, pressing her lips to his forehead. "Did you think I'd let the cold take you from me now?" Archer's recovery marked a turning point in their relationship. The last vestiges of reserve between them dissolved, replaced by a partnership deeper and more complete than either had dared to imagine. They had faced death together, rebuilt from destruction, and discovered in each other the home they'd each been seeking. Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pasture, crops in the small garden Tessa had established, and the news they had both secretly hoped for. Their first child would arrive before winter returned. "Are you happy?" Archer asked one evening as they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the hills with gold and crimson. Tessa's hand rested on the gentle swell of her belly, now visible beneath her dress. She turned to him, her face illuminated by the fading light. "Happier than I ever thought possible." She took his hand and placed it beside hers, where their child had just delivered a decisive kick. "We've created something beautiful here, Archer. Not just this," she added, indicating her pregnancy, but all of it, the ranch, the school, our life together. Archer nodded, his thumb tracing small circles against her palm. "When I found you in that snow, I was just trying to save a life. I never imagined you'd end up saving mine." Tessa looked at him questioningly. "I don't recall pulling you from any snowdrifts, Mr. James." "Not from snow," Archer said softly, "from loneliness, from a life half-lived." He met her gaze directly, allowing her to see the depth of feeling he still sometimes struggled to express in words. "You melted something in me that had been frozen a very long time." Tessa leaned into his embrace, her head finding its familiar resting place against his shoulder. "Then we saved each other," she murmured, "and continue to do so every day." As darkness settled over the land that had become their home, Archer and Tessa James remained on their porch, speaking occasionally but mostly content in silence, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced all others together, with courage and love as their constant companions. Their son, Thomas William James, was born on a crisp autumn morning, his lusty cries announcing his arrival to a world his parents had made ready to receive him. He grew into a strong, curious child, followed 2 years later by a sister, Eleanor Rose, whose determination matched her mother's and whose quiet dignity reminded everyone of her father. The school Tessa had established expanded as the territory itself grew, eventually becoming a proper schoolhouse built on land donated by the James Ranch. Children came from miles around, some boarding during the week, because the distance was too great for daily travel. Tessa's reputation as an educator spread, leading to occasional offers from larger towns, all of which she politely declined. Her place was here on this land with the family and community she and Archer had built together. As for Archer, the ranch prospered under his careful management, eventually growing to become one of the most respected operations in the region. The James brand became known for quality and fair dealings, reflecting the character of the man behind it. There were hardships, of course, droughts and blizzards, economic downturns. The loss of Archer's faithful horse chanced to old age, but none that broke the foundation they had established. Each challenge met and overcome only strengthened the bond between them, a love forged in adversity and tempered by shared purpose. On cold winter nights, when the wind howled across the plains as it had on the day they first met, Archer and Tessa would sometimes sit before their fire and marvel at the unlikely chain of events that had brought them together. A stagecoach robbery, a blizzard, a desperate woman alone in the snow, a solitary cowboy who stopped when others might have ridden past. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found me that day?" Tessa asked once, long after their children were grown with families of their own. Archer, his hair now silver but his eyes as keen as ever, shook his head slowly. "No," he replied, taking her hand as he had countless times over the decades of their marriage. "Some things are meant to be, Tessa. Even in a land as vast as this, I believe I was always meant to find you." And Tessa, looking into the face of the man who had once been a stranger and now constituted half her soul, could only agree. From the frozen moment of their first meeting to the warm certainty of their shared life, theirs was a love that had transformed not just 2 lives, but an entire corner of the Wild West, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and the heart's remarkable capacity to thaw even after the coldest of winters.